Hey everybody, thanks for joining again. This is the next video in my series of old art critiques. So taking a look back at some of my older artwork and viewing it with a more critical eye, kind of looking at where I was at and what I've learned from then to now, and sort of where I came from and where I'm going. And hopefully these videos will be entertaining, at least in terms of looking and maybe giving a little laugh at how rough some of the early stuff is, and then also educational. So if you are a young or new artist looking to figure out how to do comic book art and kind of how it works, you'll see what my progression was like, and hopefully you can learn from some of the mistakes and maybe be inspired to just keep going if you're at a point where you're still struggling a little bit. So last time I showed you some pencil pages on a very early project from the early 2000s. I'm not sure exactly what date. I have a couple more pages, and this video won't be as long as the last couple. So if you've made it this far, thank you for going through those with me. We're only going to be looking at 4 pages here. The difference is that these are inked, but I will say that these may be between sort of I think the second video that I did and the third video actually. And once I get to the artwork, you'll see why. But with no further ado, let's set it up and let's take a look at what we got. All right, so here we go. Here is the first page. And so one of the things we've seen common from the last video is the paper. So you can see I am still using that same Eon pre-lined Bristol board. These are comic pages. So it's the right size, it's the right material. So that tells us we're in the same kind of time frame as the last piece. But what's different about it is at that point, I still hadn't apparently figured out that the artwork could go all the way to the edge. So it tells you like all bleed art must extend to the solid line. So if you were to take this at this dimension and shrink it down, reduce it for comic books, you would actually end up with this giant white border around this initial page, as opposed to this art filling up the whole page. So I know, so one of the things it says is there's dotted lines that tell you what they call copy. And basically that means all of your lettering, your word balloons and stuff need to go within this box so that it doesn't get clipped off when you print it and put the comic together. So obviously, like I said, at that point, I had not figured that out yet. The reason I say that so that's one thing, because in the last pages we looked at with the pencil pages with the character with the wings just jumping off the building, if you saw that one, I knew enough to extend the art all the way out to the outside. And then looking at this, it looks like I'm inking here. And that's one of the big differences. The previous ones we saw were pencil pages. These are inked pages. And it looks like I'm working with the same type of materials in terms of the pens that I'm using as I was earlier with the first inked work that I showed you. So let me grab that. So I think if you saw the earlier video, this was a page that I did back in 97. And I talked about this is a little rougher. The paper here has a little more tooth, whereas this is a smooth paper. But you can see it looks kind of like it's the same type of pens that are being used. So just very quickly, for those of you who don't know, let me explain a little bit about inking comic books and sort of that process. So back in the old days, when comics were first being made, the printing process required you to have a very solid dark ink. And because if you know anything about printing, it was very much what you hear about printing in like a printing press. There was you'd have this image, and you would have sort of a plate, metal plate, that would be sort of the opposite of this. So anything that was black would be a raised up part of that plate. You put ink on it, you press it down to the paper, you come up, you put ink on it, new paper, boom, boom, boom. And that's how we print things. So little tiny fine lines and delicate stuff could get lost in that printing type of process. So the first thing that people used traditionally, if you go back to early comics, things were inked with a brush. They literally took a brush and a jar of ink, and they dipped the brush in, and all lines would be done with a brush, whether it was a very thin line or a very thick line. And what they learned in terms of a style is a brush allows you to do a line that changes its size as you go, right? So you can start very thin, and then it goes, and then you push down on the brush and the line gets wide and thin again. And, you can do that. And so that is the style that early comic books were done, as far as I know, until probably like the late 70s into the early 80s. And that's when we had somebody such as Terry Austin. So Terry Austin, if you Google Terry Austin, probably one of the greatest inkers, comic book inkers of all time. He started using pens. So he started using these technical pens called rapidograph pens, usually used for like architecture or drawing, mechanical drawings, like if you want to diagram how an engine is put together or something like that. They will make these three-dimensional drawings that show all the parts and all this in space and how they work and how they all fit together. So those are done with these technical pens that draw a very straight, very solid line that doesn't vary with a lot of thick or thinness. So he used things like that. And then also the other one is called a croquill pen, or you sometimes hear it called like a dip pen. And again, this is something I think comes from sort of like the calligraphy style of writing. So you have these pens, and basically at the end of the pen is a piece of metal, and the metal is split down the middle like this, so that when you are drawing, it has a very, obviously this is using my fingers as an example, but it has a very fine point, and you can get a very straight point line. But as you press down on it, this metal splits apart, and the ink is filling in the middle here. And so you go from a thin line to a thicker line to a thin line. So it was a way to both have a pen, which most artists are familiar with, the feeling of drawing with a pen, but then also have that thick to thin brush kind of style that you could have. And so the pen inking really changed things. Like I said, into the 80s, with guys like Terry Austin, who, again, one of the greatest inkers in the history of comics. But then you also have some of the biggest, movers and shakers, the guys like Todd McFarlane, Rob Liefeld, guys who ink their own work, who use those croquill pens, and really, took the comic book industry by storm in the 90s. So then to wrap it up, there's kind of two more things from there. People use that pen, and then somebody like me, for example, when I draw, I refer to it as heavy-handed. I press down very hard when I'm drawing. It's just the way I work. I find it's easier for me to keep control of the line, whether it's ink or pencil or whatever. I tend to, unless I'm drawing very fast, very sketchy, I tend to press down. And when you're using those pens, you literally dig into the paper, which isn't that great. So using those pens, I did try to learn how to use those pens early on, and it was pretty hard. I had a little bit of a tough time with it, and it's something that I didn't stick with long enough to really master. But into the 90s, late 90s, maybe even into the early 2000s, we started seeing more markers. People refer to them as markers, but I also refer to them as pens. And I'll show you a couple. Not these are particular brands. I'm not a sponsor of any kind, but these kinds of pens, you'll see a lot of artists using these, and they come in different size tips so that you have some that are a very wider, thicker tip. Some come with even like brush style tips at the end. Some are itty bitty, teeny tiny. But they also all have the India ink. Whereas the old style of felt markers, things like Sharpies and stuff like that, Marks a Lot markers, those inks aren't archival. They don't last. And so typically they will turn color over time. They will turn sort of a purple, sometimes brown, depending on the ink. So it's not good. So I was of the school of pens because you don't have to worry about having a jar of ink. You can travel with these. They're cleaner. They're easier to translate. If you're comfortable drawing with a pencil, you can be comfortable drawing with a pen. And if you want to get the line variation, you can sort of do it through a couple of tricks. You can just use a much bigger marker, right? So you can have, and you can see this actually in some of these, the things that are further away have thinner lines, and then up here it's supposed to be very close in the foreground. You have stuff that has very thick line, and you can do that. Like I said, they also have these type of pens that have like a flexible brush tip to it, so you can almost try to emulate the look of inking with a traditional brush, but still having that marker feel. And then now to bring it full circle, a lot of people are going to digital inks. So you can use your computer, scan in your pencils, create a layer over the top of those original pencils, and you can come in with various programs and equipment, technology, different types of drawing tablets. Some you draw right on the screen, right on the drawing. Some it's a separate tablet you draw and the mouse moves on the screen. A lot of people are starting to do that and mastering that. So you're using just technology to replicate the same look and feel of either that brush inking technique or the crow quill dipping. You can have digital pens that mimic that effect with the pressure of when you're, the stylus you're using, actually the pressure of it on the screen will adjust the thickness of the line. So digital is a new way to go. And again, I mentioned, earlier, Todd McFarlane, he is a guy that has totally embraced digital inking. That's what he does these days. I don't know that he draws anything on, he doesn't draw certainly as much as he used to, but I don't know that he draws anything on paper anymore. Everything is digital. So there you go. So the techniques and things keep changing over time, and it's just a new tool to create the same concept of let's get a solid black and white piece of artwork that we can then replicate through a printing process. So this piece here is a splash page. It is an establishing shot to show us that it's this it's supposed to sort of remind us of a old feudal Japan feel, but you can see like through this costume here, and then in the next page you'll see some stuff. It's supposed to have sort of a futuristic bend to it as well. So you've got, your traditional sort of the tile roof look, and you've got clothes on a line hanging, but then and sort of like monk and maybe like a samurai guy walking the street, but it's also going to be there's also some other stuff to it. Not bad. I would, again, I think I mentioned this in the last one, and I'm gonna bring it down and kind of try to zoom in a little bit for you here on some pieces and some elements kind of moving around. Crowds are tough because, again, each character, it's like, when you're drawing a comic book and you have let's say one superhero, you design that superhero, maybe, right? So like we'll say Batman. And if you have Batman, then you also have to design the villains. And then if you have some other heroes. You have to design Commissioner Gordon, and you have to design Robin and Batgirl and stuff. So you end up designing all these characters, but if you do a big crowd scene, it's almost like you have to design a whole, the characters for all this crowd scene. These all are people, and they are all different, and no two people in a crowd are exactly the same. So it's a whole bunch of extra work to go in. That being said, this really needs to be filled in. It's very empty. It doesn't feel like this is a place where people live. You've got a few things. I got some birds, and I like the laundry in the back. That little element I thought was nice. You got this broken sort of stone wall. I get what I'm doing here. You have stones, and then you have the little stones in between, and I guess, and the space would be like sort of the mortar holding it together. It's so far away in the distance, I don't think it needs that. It doesn't read necessarily as a rock wall, because there's too much detail for that distance, right? All you would sort of see is just some vague shapes. Also, this little group of children running through, again, so cartoony, like super Looney Tunes, cartoon. Because kids have weird proportions, right? Kids have bigger heads than they should have, smaller bodies, and kind of weird because they're, because of the way kids grow. Just drawing them as like little cartoony people doesn't work. So if you're drawing, young kids, especially, it's easy today with the internet. Google kids, like playground, whatever, and just kind of study it a little bit. Obviously, that it's just a little element in the back, but it does stick out to me. I don't like it. Again, also some of the texture stuff isn't really working so much for me. I don't know that the lighting's consistent. There's a shadow underneath that, and sort of the building itself is casting a shadow, and there's a shadow in here. There's also one on this side of the window, which means the light's kind of coming that way. So if the light's coming that way, why wouldn't there be a shadow maybe over here? Actually, really, I do kind of like this. I'm not sure if it's 100, if it reads 100%, but this idea of like there's an open door and there's a staircase going up that door could be a little bit better. But again, I could have just made it black, right? Like all these other windows. Instead, I'm trying to show something that you kind of see inside. So, giving it a shot. Starting to understand like texture, you need some texture on some stuff, especially like this roof element here. You do have to be careful because depending on the color that you do, digital color or not, some of this can get lost if you use a real dark saturated color over it. So if it was a real like red brick color, I would have spent a bunch of time drawing all these little nicks and dings of brick to give it a texture, and you wouldn't see it in the final piece. So something to think about there as you go ahead. But and then the last thing, I don't know, the perspective, I guess, is okay. It's, to be honest, the perspective is definitely faked. I would say this door jamb is not right. This is not in the right perspective. It looks wonky. And it's this top part comes down too far. It should be kind of going up more that way, right? Because everything is going to come down to a point. Right. So I guess either, so the front of this would have been a little lower, or the back of this would have been higher. But for, obviously, I could tell you, I know I didn't do a perspective grid. I didn't go in and say, here's my horizon line is kind of out here, and then here's my vanishing points, and then all lines go to the vanishing point. You draw a whole grid, and that puts everything in the same perspective. This is faked, but not terrible in regards to that. So that's my thoughts on that page. So then we have page 2, and we're back to this idea of we're in the market. And again, the artwork that I've done is not big enough. It needs to be out bigger to the edges. We've got a guy in a vending booth, this old man in the vending booth, We've got a couple just people walking around again, again trying to fill in the area. You've got a family with a young boy, and then the young boy sees something that gets him very excited. And then in the next page, I think it was a toy. It was some sort of a truck toy or a vehicle toy in a different vending booth that he wants. And I think his parents get it for him. And again, it's sort of adding in it has an old school, but then that's going to have like a sort of a sci-fi feel. And if I remember correctly, now there was only 2 pages I ever did. So again, this is somebody who reached out to me on the internet back in the day and said, "Hey, I like your stuff. We should work together. I have a script. Do you want to draw some pages?" And you go, "Yeah, that sounds great." And you draw a couple of pages and you go, "Hey man, here you go." And that's it. And it's gone. Whether they lost interest or they didn't like what I was doing or whatever the case may be, that was something that happens a lot. It happens a lot to young artists who are just looking for someone to help them out, who are trying to get a writing partner or somebody to get, again, that exposure with. So I want to come in a little tighter here on the booth, and I'm going to talk about this first panel because it needs some help. Okay. First of all, okay, here, not bad. You're right. So I'm trying to show foreground, sort of middle ground, background. This face here, this woman over in the corner, much bigger. Could even overlap the arm of this guy. That would really help create the idea that she's in front, he's in back. He could even be a little higher up on the page. The booth, not too bad in terms of its perspective, I think. But one of the problems here is a lack of underdrawing. So this happens a lot, and I can tell you for sure, this is what happens with young artists all the time, is if I want to draw this figure, right, this guy, so let's say I sketch out the booth first. Okay, that's cool. That's a smart idea. He's going to be behind it. So do your booth first, and now he's going to be inside the booth. If I was to take and draw, so here's his waist. That means his hips are about here, which means then his legs can only be about that long because the bottom of his feet can't be longer than this. So from his waist to the bottom of his feet is just a little bit longer than the pen cap, which is not as long as his whole torso. So usually your legs are slightly, especially in comic book, are going to be slightly longer than the rest of your torso. So unless this guy has a very odd physique, I didn't go ahead and draw the parts that you can't see through the building or the vendor booth in the foreground. I should have drawn, well, this is all in pencil before you ink. You draw this guy's legs like this is see-through. And then you go, oh, so this is too short. So either I've got to shrink him, I have to move his head up, or I need to make the bottom of the booth bigger. Any of those options are there. Apparently, I chose to do none. Not sure why, but okay. The other thing about this that I don't like is the shading. So I've got a lot of the wood grain texture, which is fine. You have a very deep shadow here, which means that your light is coming this way, right? So this whole booth is casting kind of a shadow here. That means that inside here, which I've just sort of indicated with this line, this should be almost black in here, mostly in here, and definitely this is an overhang of this roof, and then there's this wood on the side. If the light's coming this from behind of the other angle, right, you're assuming the roof kind of goes like that. Again, if I had drawn it through the page, you're going to get shadow under here for sure. This whole front should be much more shadowed, not just textured, but shadowed. This should be shadowed here. This should be in shadow. There's a lot more shading that should have happened. And the way that I did it with just these sort of tick lines, it doesn't look different enough than the wood grain. Now you could say, you could say, well, I'm going to save it by coloring. So I'm going to make this a much darker color than here, and I'll make this front darker, but then you're relying on color to tell the story in terms of where the light is and not the actual art. So that's not a great idea. This is supposed to be an alley between two buildings. And again, this is some not good perspective. Because all of a sudden now the angle goes very high, way up in the back. This is supposed to be shadow. Make it just black shadow. If it's that dark between the buildings, make it that dark. I don't know. So, and then a couple more things real quick. This guy's sort of crazy axe pole thing. Again, cutting in front of this and then touching this line here kind of makes this all very muddy. It's very difficult to read what it is. Again, in color, this would be sort of a metal, and this is browns and all that, but don't rely on the color to separate it out. That doesn't work. Now, here's a building. This is a door in the building. So you can see this is the doorway, and I've got this jug hanging here in the middle, and then the way this all comes together here again is a big weird tangent where it doesn't read as the door behind. Also, this is messed up. Like if you open a door and it goes into the room, if you go in to close this door, I don't know, you could close that door. Again, just really weird. The top of the door, you'd sort of be able to see it because it's both are going back in space. So again, a whole thing about perspective, and clearly at this point not understanding perspective. Looking here, the family, again, I would emphasize better underdrawing. So this guy, like his shoulder comes way down, almost like to the bottom of his sternum. So the shoulder is way too low. The elbow means it's okay about the waist, and then this arm is super long. Again, I get it. It's supposed to be sort of bulky clothing, and it's all over the place. But yeah, it doesn't change the fact that you need to draw the figure, but draw the figure like it has no clothes on it, especially if you're, when you're just learning. Just draw that blank figure, and then add the stuff over the top, and then you don't have to worry about it being wrong, basically. The kid, not bad. I mentioned earlier about, kids having a different proportions and stuff. Maybe it's because he doesn't have any hair on top. I think it works a little better. The arm is a little shorter. He kind of, to me, it doesn't read like a little adult. I kind of read that as a little kid. The shading, like this is, unless you're doing something that's very shiny, metal or very shiny spandex or something like that, almost all of your shading really needs some sort of rendering off of it, whether that's cross-hatching or feathering or whatever technique you want. But if you just do, unless you're a few incredibly talented artists, if you're Frank Miller, if you're Mike Mignola, use all the solid blacks you want. They just take and do huge chunks of shadow, and it absolutely works. But for me, I feel like, especially with things like clothing, if you don't add in some of that feathering or render, however you want to refer to it, let's just say rendering, whatever style you want, just a solid black along really reads as like a shine type. So, and it flattens it out. There's no idea that this wraps around the kid's body. Super flat. And so I've added a little element here. So all the shading is on the left. Like the light is coming this way. But why is there just a little line? Like, if this is a jacket and the light's coming across, why wouldn't this be down further down here? Why wouldn't there be heavier shadow over here, depending on how strong the light source is? And that's another point. If you have a light source that is, just your everyday sunshine outside, probably not going to be so strong that you have just gigantic, solid, huge chunks of black shadow. If it's a light, if it's a lamp or something like that, yeah, because there's only one light source. But when you do sunshine and outdoors, if it's a normal Earth thing, there's a lot more radiant light all around. If you go outside and look at things, stand in the sunlight, you have a shadow that's on the ground, but if you look at your arm, you're going to have some shadows, but you're not going to have like just huge black, shadows where the light doesn't reach. The light is kind of all around and lights up a lot more. So anyway, and then, this part of him showing the excitement, I don't need this. I get it. And it's supposed to direct you to like, oh, he's looking at something. Just show it in the face. His eyes are huge. They're pointed in a direction. His mouth is agape. You don't need this shorthand for excited. Let the story tell you that they're excited. This is, you don't need it. Okay, so that's those pages here. And then about the same time, we have another project. And again, both of these are from scripts that somebody had written, two different people had written. And I was translating those scripts into these pages. And again, I think still probably full script where the writer is saying, okay, page 1, there are 4 panels. Panel 1 is a space station with ships around it and a planet and a sun. So that's what I'm doing now. I'm designing the satellite. Maybe they might have said the satellite has a giant ring around it. I don't know if that's important to the story. Maybe not. Then a second shot where you can see, zooming in. Third shot, we can see through the windows and we see that there are some aliens walking around. And then the fourth one, we see the main character is this little alien musician guy. Which you'll see in the next page. That's how we know he's a musician. So a couple of things I want to point out. Again, still using more of the more of the Sharpie style of pen, though I may, on some of the finer line work, I think it may have been starting to move into the using this type, the micron pens, I think, because it doesn't, I would say that's possible. So probably on like the large black areas, I think I was probably filling them in with a Sharpie. And you can see there's a lot of variation in the black, and I think that's why. But a lot of the line work, the thin line work, was done with pens. So so you've got a spaceship, a space station, a planet, spaceships coming in. The inside of the circle here, I think you can understand because we've referenced it. So you see it here. There's here, we'll zoom in on the panel. So in panel 1, it's been clear that there's this ring and there's this row of windows. And then here again, you see the ring and here's the row of windows. And then again, now we're zooming in closer to the windows. And then lastly, we see inside. And so interesting, just some shapes for aliens at this distance. I'm okay with this because, again, you're supposed to, the idea is you're looking through glass. So if I was going to do this in color, this would be sort of maybe a bluish, over everything just to show you're looking through glass. That's what I would be doing. Here we got the little guy. He's carrying a case. It would not have killed me to use a ruler to make sure that the case was the same size all the way through. You've got a nice little a cameo by a famous smuggler and his partner. We have a nice blobby, and I think this, by the boots and the sort of the top, I think this is somebody who comes from Starfleet, let's say. Let's see. But, in terms of composition and stuff, I don't, you have an establishing shot closer in to the windows. I'm all right. There's options on how you do this. Here I did profile so that this guy's moving through and people are walking past each other like in an airport or something. It's okay. Would it have been different if I had done it 3/4 where people are walking back and forth this way to create more depth of that passageway? Maybe. I'm not. It doesn't bother me a ton. It'd be interesting to go back and sort of look at a couple different options and go, how does it work if I do it? If I do it this way or I do it that way. So, second page. We'll zoom out just so you can see the whole thing again. So the little guy walks over to an area where he kind of settles in, and he opens up his case and he takes out his funky musical instrument and he begins to play, and then we see the music as an element, as a design element kind of come through as he's playing. And the idea, if I remember correctly, of the whole story, the concept was that this guy, it was going to be almost like an anthology book where this alien plays music in some sort of like galactic, like an airport. And as we see different characters interact with them, you split off for a couple pages and you get a sense of their story, and then you split off and you see the other people's stories. And so while he's sort of like the narrator or the storyteller, we're not telling his story. We're telling other people's stories and how it interacts with him and the music and stuff like that. So get into the panels. Okay. One thing I would say is that I think would be different, that I would do differently here. I've added, again, these little nicks and ticks and things, and here's some very bad cross-hatching to try to do a black to light shadow. If this is supposed to be a big sci-fi spaceship space station, I would think things would be more shiny, metal, smooth. Adding these little textures and things doesn't indicate metal, doesn't indicate smooth. That I would definitely do differently. And this is a terrible transition. And that's just because I clearly was not using the right material. So the lines are very thick, like it's a very thick pen, when really what you want to do, if you're going to do a nice hatching to create that gray texture, is you want to do a lot of very small lines that then blend together and fade out. Otherwise, okay. I mean, he's obviously a very cartoony character, so things like proportion and stuff don't come into play. As he settles down, it's not bad. We move from here. This could have been, and again, I don't know what the script called for. The script could have called for a medium shot, like very specifically medium shot of alien walking over to a little area off to the side. If that's the case, then you've got some background elements and stuff like that. This could have been an overhead shot, maybe, to show more of the space around him. Could have been, again, another longer shot, because the figures, so he's this big, right? We'll say this big. And then here, even though he's zoomed in, I've drawn it basically the same size, just zoomed in. And then when we come to this panel, he's basically the exact same size and the exact same size. So even though the character is closer to the camera in this page and this page, they're the same size. So making this one much smaller as an overhead shot to, again, help reestablish the space they're in, maybe that's the way to do it. Or this needs to be zoomed in much higher, or vice versa. This could be the zoom in of him walking, just him, and then this one maybe is the aerial shot to show above, to show him opening up that case that he's been carrying, and we see that he's got an instrument in it. So we'll see. We do have another little famous cameo here of a astromech droid that we all know. I like the idea of the space potted plant. I don't know why. This is probably the best picture of the piece, I think, so far, where the background's washed out, he's isolated. It's like he's in a spotlight. That being said, if he's in a spotlight, don't draw the outline of the spotlight. Just make the white and then fill it all in, but that's okay. This motif of the music notes coming out as a piece of the composition, I like it here, like this. I don't know how it works with this one. So this one's good. I like the detail of him and the face and the look. I like the design of this funky alien keyboard, is kind of cool. I like the texture, little bits of his skin, and you get a sense that maybe he's old, kind of a Yoda-y kind of guy. This one I like, but so this, again, this music motif comes up, and all it does is cut the panel almost in half. So now I've put him here on top, but the music isn't interacting with him in any way. It doesn't make sense to me. You've got the line of what's supposed to be the wall, and again, trying a bad cross hatching to try to blend out this black into a lighter color, like he's in a spotlight, but it doesn't work for me. Again, this is probably where you could do, I like this motif, I might pull it down a little further. It doesn't need to be quite up so far into the panel. Make it lower, do a close-up of his face as he's playing. Tough with the sort of visor thing that I gave him. I think he's supposed to be blind, I think was the story. So you don't, without seeing his eyes, he loses a little bit of the characterization that you can do with his face. But it would come from his mouth, his posture, but I could definitely do more of a close-up and show how much he's into the music here, and I think that's how I would have done that differently. But and the other thing I would have done as well is I probably would have darkened up and thickened up as it goes from this size to the close-up stuff, not just making the notes bigger, but making these lines thicker and heavier so that it really stands out as a foreground element from the what's behind it of the alien. So there we go. So there is some early 2000s inked work that I did, and it's very different when you start inking your own work. You have to think differently, use your different parts of your brain in different art techniques and things like that. So I would definitely recommend that you keep working on that, and hopefully I've given you some ideas that that you could take, or some lessons that I've learned here, and apply it, and move ahead with your own stuff. Thank you for watching the video. I appreciate it very much. I hope you enjoyed it. Next time we are going to be looking at another piece that is now back to something that I wrote, a small storyline that I came up with for a online contest that has a little bit of cover work, some ink work, and storytelling. And we'll review that next time. So thanks, and I'll talk to you soon.